So many scientists ask me, how can I minimise my chance of things going wrong, of things being miscommunicated when they're talking to journalists? And what I would say to them is, interacting with the press is not a risk-free enterprise. You can't control what the media do with your story, but there are some things that you can do to minimise the risk of your story being misreported or miscommunicated in any way. And one of them is to take a lot of care with the press releases that you produce. Now, I'm not excusing journalists here. A good journalist should not use a press release, well, a good, well-resourced journalist shouldn't use a press release as the sole source for a story. They should phone the researcher up, they should do their research, they should do their homework, they should get to the bottom of the story. Now, for various reasons, this doesn't always happen. A lot of places are cutting back in terms of their funding. There are fewer and fewer journalists chasing more and more stories. And in many cases, what's in the press release is what gets reported on rather than what's in the paper as such. So if you are going to produce a press release, and these are the summaries that research institutions turn out to get journalists to come and talk to them about their own research, about the research and produce stories about them, do take the same care with what goes into a press release as to what goes into a peer-reviewed research paper. It's often, slightly tempting as a scientist to think, well, this is something frivolous, it's something unimportant. It's not. This is how the public often find out about your research. So do take the same sort of care with a press release as you would with your own peer-reviewed research paper. So check your press release. If there's, a journal sends out a press release, ask if you can check it. Talk to your press officer, find out what sorts of things they want to put in there. And in particular, although press releases are written in the popular style, this doesn't mean to say you have to sacrifice accuracy. You do not have to dumb things down. You need to be selective about what you choose to communicate, and you don't have to sex it up. You don't have to over-exaggerate or oversell, and in fact there are many dangers in doing so. So be very careful about including something in the press release, such as speculations or extrapolations or off-the-cuff comments that aren't in the paper. How would you feel if your speculation were the headline that came out? Because that could be, what happened. And again, as I said, I'm not excusing journalists. They should do their homework, but it doesn't always happen. And here are some steps that you can take to minimise the risk of something going wrong. Now, the UK Royal Society helped draw up some guidelines which are available on the internet. The link is available on the IRB site. About how you can interact most effectively with health and biology reporting. So first of all, if you're talking to a journalist, always be very clear about what the status of your research is. Is it something very preliminary, for example? How reliable is the information? Is it a preliminary study of 2 people, or is it a massive study of thousands, in which case it might be more statistically significant? And also be clear, has it gone through peer review, or is it something very preliminary, some new results that have come out? Because that'll help the journalists evaluate how reliable the finding is, how much more research they need to do, how many more people they need to talk to establish the facts of the story. The other thing is you should be realistic about your area of expertise. Now, a journalist might phone you up to ask about your research, or they might want to talk to you about someone else's research. This is what's known as independent comment. If I'm writing a story about a paper that's come out in a journal, I'll talk to the scientist whose work it is, but then I need someone else, another expert in the field, to help me interpret this paper. What does it really mean? What are the implications? Where is it going? So I'll need another expert. So if someone phones you up and it's not your area of expertise, do be realistic about what you can and can't comment on. Next, don't feel you have to exaggerate or allow yourself to be drawn into something that isn't right. Again, it's tempting because a lot of journalists have a reputation of being a bit flaky, or perhaps, a lot of the scientific community often thinks that all journalists are flaky and they're going to make things up. That's not true. Well, it might be slightly true in some cases, but most journalists are interested in producing something accurate and serve the readers well. So don't be pressed into saying something that isn't right. Stand your ground and say, no, that's not right. Don't exaggerate. Obviously, I don't need to tell you don't lie. It occasionally happens, and a good journalist will be able to ferret it out. So don't go off on a tangent about something that's not related to what you're working on. And one particular bugbear, one particular area where health scares can start or things can go wrong is in risk reporting. It's very important that when you're talking to journalists, and this is true of journalists themselves when they're writing their stories, researchers and journalists should always be very clear about communicating both the relative risk and the absolute risk of any given bit of research. So this is a purely hypothetical example. Say, for example, you describe a relative risk of listening to an MP3 player that doubles your risk of brain cancer, say. Okay, that sounds a bit scary. And it's the sort of thing that could be plastered across the newspapers as something quite terrifying. However, if you then tell everyone, actually, your absolute risk, your baseline risk of developing brain cancer is 1 in a million, add MP3 players into the equation and it rises to 2 in a million, it's suddenly not such a scare story anymore. And you know, journalists will serve their readers well and scientists will serve themselves well if they're realistic and upfront about the relative and absolute risks. And when you're talking about numbers, often it's harder for members of the public to understand the difference between a 0.001 risk of something and a 0.002 risk of something. Frame it in the sort of numbers like this. It increases it from a likelihood of 1 in a million to 2 in a million. That's something it's just easier to get across that way, I think. The other issue you'll come across as a scientist is uncertainty, particularly some fields such as climate research. And scientific truth, as we know, is tentative. You express it in terms of degrees of certainty rather than absolute certainty. You know, science is not about determining absolute truth. It's about determining reliable knowledge through a process of hypothesis generation, data collection, and deduction. So when you're talking about some areas of science, you'll be dealing with degrees of certainty, particularly climate change, for example. You know, the degrees of certainty that something might happen. How sure can we be that something's going to happen? So be clear that uncertainty is not the same as not knowing anything. It's just a degree of being sure about something. And it's not because scientists are incompetent or stupid. It's just the way science works. You know, this is how we work. We can say with such and such degree of confidence that such and such might happen. And again, don't be pushed into overstating something if you know that you're not absolutely certain about it. It can, over time, overstating facts or overselling things can erode the public trust in science. Obviously, I can only sort of confine my remarks to English because that's my native tongue, but do be careful about the words you use. You know, this will cause such and such to happen is a very strong statement. If you're not sure, say things like this would happen, this could happen, this may mean, this might mean, instead of the positive statements like that. And if you have got some conflicts between differing research results, do be upfront about it and explain them. Don't try and hide them or gloss things over. So I've talked about the responsibilities of scientists, the responsibilities of journalists. Of course, I think it's fair to say, certainly the journalists I know, most of them strive to produce accurate reports and serve their readers well. Do be aware, of course, that journalists are here to serve their readers. They're not here to be your PR. I don't just write down what you say. Well, I shouldn't just write down what you say and take it at face value. I should research it, evaluate it, talk to other people, and then present a well-researched, argued article for my readers. We are not crazy, completely free wild cards, as it were. We do have our own code of conduct. Most of us should observe it about what we can do, what we can't do. And of course, we're bound by the law as well. So again, although interacting with the media might sound scary, it's hopefully not too bad. The last thing I'd say is if you are contacted by a journalist, do get in touch with your press officer. They're here to help take you through the process, to put you in touch with reliable journalists, perhaps talk you through what you want to get across to them, help get your message out there so you're not alone.